How do you sing the songs of the gods? In this video, we're going to feature 3 extended excerpts from 3 poems, written at various times from the 3rd century BCE through to the 3rd AD. Each purports to give voice to a divine or semi-divine singer. But the first 2, firmly established as classics of world literature, seem to lack the confidence to give voice to the singer directly. Only the latter, the least of them all, the cultural cul-de-sac if you like, directly quotes the god-singer's words. Each is framed by its dramatic context, as much as it is by the tradition within which it finds or places itself. The first is the Song of Orpheus, taken from Book 1 of the Argonautica by Apollonius of Rhodes. Notwithstanding his name, Apollonius found employment and fame in Alexandria, Egypt, and was perhaps born there too. Philip II of Macedon and his son, Alexander the Great, had conquered the Greek-speaking world and from there had proceeded to invade the Persian Empire, Egypt and beyond, into even the northern parts of the Indian subcontinent. Almost immediately following Alexander's death, his empire fractured, many parts of which remaining under the control of Alexander's generals and their descendants, including, in Egypt, Ptolemy and his dynasty, which would maintain power from their capital, Alexandria, until Roman times. This was thus a new phase in Greek history. The language and culture of Greece had been had colonized, if you like, new lands, though not for the first time. And Egyptian Alexandria was an especial focal point of this expanded Greek culture. Its physical institutions manifest in the famous Library of Alexandria. The library was far more than a repository of written culture. It was a center of learning, study, and of literary innovation. Many of its librarians, Apollonius included, worked as both scholars, curators, and analysts of the inherited tradition, but also as innovative artists in their own right. Cataloguing, formalizing, picking apart what came before them and making it new. Whilst many of his peers worked in miniature, Apollonius went for the grand scale, writing an epic about Jason and the Argonauts and their quest for the Golden Fleece, the Argonautica. The Song of Orpheus is just that, a report of the song sung by one of the Argonauts, none other than the demi-divine singer Orpheus himself. Apollonius, presumably consciously avoiding all advice to start in medias res, 'cause he can, has spent the best part of 500 lines setting up the expedition. And the Argonauts have not even set off. Rather, just as they're making the final sacrifices ready to set off, they break into a fight. So, Orpheus sings a song to calm everybody down. He sang of how the earth and sky and sea, once coalesced into a single form, were rent apart by terrible strife, and how the stars and moon and the sun paths have their place, ever fixed in the sky. He sang of how the mountains rose, how the rivers resounding with the nymphs themselves and all who creep upon the earth came to be. He sang how first Ophion and Eurynome, Ocean's daughter, ruled Olympus, and how by force of arms he yielded honour to Kronos, she to Rhea, then fell into the ocean's waves. Yet still they lorded it over the divine and blessed Titans, while Zeus, a youth and immature of mind, dwelled deep in the Dictaean cave, for the earth-born Cyclopes had not yet endowed him with the bolt, the thunder, and the lightning, those things which grant Zeus his glory. The next excerpt comes from Virgil, 1st century BCE, Rome. It's the Song of Silenus from Virgil's Sixth Eclogue. Virgil's Eclogues are ostensibly pastoral poems, short-form poems about shepherds and goat herds, cow herds, and other thing herds too. But they're constantly straining at the boundaries, pushing into all kinds of adjacent territories. Which is all a load of rubbish because pastoral is never a thing. That's what these poets do, you see. They purport to form a genre that never was, and then in some kind of literary sleight of hand, they bust that very genre. Whereas Orpheus's song is framed by an entire epic, the frame to this song is almost perfunctory. 2 boys, herdsmen presumably, Chromis and Mnasilos, find the god Silenus asleep in a cave, wasted. Apparently, He had promised to sing to them before, but hadn't made good on his promise. So they jump him and tie him up with garlands, and a nymph, Aegle, suddenly appears and joins in. Silenus awakes, protests, but then relents and breaks into song, one, we are told, more marvellous than that of Orpheus. For he sang of how the seeds of land and sky and sea and also liquid fire assembled through the vastness of the void, how from these first things came all primeval matter, then how the world's fragile orb itself became concrete. The earth began to harden, to shut off Nereus with the sea, and slowly take the form of things. Now the lands marvelled at the newly shining sun, and from the uplifted clouds the rain began to fall, while forests arose and rare beasts wandered over untouched hills. Then he sang of the cast stones of Pyrrha, of the Saturnian age, of Caucasian birds and Prometheus's theft. Next he sang of the voyagers, crying Alpha Hylas, abandoned at the spring, so that the whole shore resounded Hylas, Hylas. And he consoles Pasiphae, who would have been lucky if only cattle had never existed. He consoles her with the love of a snow-white bull. O unlucky maiden, what madness took you? The Proitides filled the fields with fake moos, but none of them aspired to bestiality, even though they feared the plough upon their neck, and often felt for imagined horns upon their smooth brow. O unlucky maiden, now you wander over the hills, and there he lies, resting his snow-white flanks on the soft hyacinth, chewing on the pale grass under a dark oak, or courting a cow from the great herd. Nymphs, close off the wooded glade, close it off, Dictaean nymphs, in case the bull on his wandering path should come before our very eyes, or perhaps cows might lead him to our Gortinian stables, enticed by the green grass or following the herd. Then he sang of the girl besotted with the apple of the Hesperides. Then his song surrounds the sisters of Phaethon with moss and bitter bark, and stretches out their branching limbs from the soil. Then he sings of Gallus, wandering to the streams of Pamesus, how one of the sisters leads him through the Aeonian mounts, so that the whole chorus of Phoebus honours the man, and how Linus, the shepherd with a divine song, crowned with flowers and bitter parsley, spoke these words to him. The Muses gift these reed pipes to you, accept them. These pipes that once they gave to the old Ascrian man, and from which he used to draw the stubborn ash trees down from the mountains with song. With these you must sing of the origins of the Grenian grove, so that there may be no other grove more gloried by Apollo. Why should I tell of how he sang of Nisus' daughter Scylla, whose white loins, the story goes, were encircled by barking monsters, who harried the Ithacan ships, and in the swirling deeps tore apart the terrified crew with her sea dogs? Or how he sang of the mutated limbs of Tereus, the feasts and gifts which Philomela prepared for him, her escape route to deserted places, those wings upon which she first wretchedly hovered above her home, and the songs that Phoebus sang, and which blessed Eurytas heard, and which he taught to the laurel trees, these too Silenus sang. There's a lot to unpick in that, and I'm not even going to try. There's just so much to it. So much that you could say it is the precedent for an entire epic. Ovid's Metamorphoses to me is like a song of Silenus writ large and taken to further extreme levels of awesome creativity. We'll remain in the pastoral tradition and look forward 300 years or so to the Third Eclogue of Nemesianus. If you've watched our top 5 classical dogs video, you might remember him as the author of the Kynogetica, the didactic poem about rearing and hunting with dogs. Nemesianus was also the author of 4 Eclogues, all in a post-Virgilian mode. His third features the Song of Pan. Like the previous 2 songs, this has a narrative frame, one closely modelled on Virgil's Sixth Eclogue. 3 youths, Nyctalus, Amyntas, and Micon, are doing their thing, being Arcadian shepherds or something near Mount Minos, when they come across the god Pan, sleeping under a tree. Quick tangent. Notice the setup. The scenario of some boys stumbling across a sleeping god is clearly an allusion to Virgil's Sixth Eclogue, but whereas Virgil's Sixth sought to break the, albeit artificial, boundaries of the pastoral tradition, Nemesianus doubles down on the pastoral scene. Whereas many commentators have noted that Silenus, the singer in Virgil's Sixth, is an unpastoral character, Pan is as pastoral as they get. He's so pastoral he's even half goat. And the poem is expressly set in Arcadia. Indeed, Minos is just a few kilometers south of Orpheus, the setting of our last video in Aristocrates. And Arcadia is, of course, the epitome of pastoral settings. Or is it? See, that's the thing. We kind of all think of Arcadia and pastoral as the same, but it's a received truth that proves illusory. Theocritus, the founder of a genre, generally has a Sicilian setting. Many of Virgil's eclogues are set in a fantasy world that seems to have a closer connection to Rome and Italy, and one can say the same of his successors, Calpurnius and the anonymous author of the unedited Eclogues. The idea of an Arcadian setting derives really from nothing more than a couple of passing references in Virgil. But retrospectively, and perhaps even by Nemesianus' time, pastoral had become synonymous with Arcadia, and that's when Nemesianus clearly sets his third eclogue. But back to the scene. The boys find Pan asleep beneath the tree and see Pan's pipes hanging from the branches. They have a go. Their attempts at music are atrocious. I mean, what do you expect? They're panpipes, for God's sake. Pan wakes up and volunteers a song. Anything to make the panpipes stop. I sing of you who with your ivy-decked brow adorned with heavy berries weaves garlands of vines, who leads tigers with your moist vine shoot, letting your fragrant locks fall over your shoulders, true child of Jupiter. For Semele saw Jupiter's true form revealed, as none but the stars in the sky had before. The omnipotent Father, mindful of ages to come, bore and at the right time gave birth to you. The nymphs and ancient fauns and impudent satyrs, and also me, we all look after him in the verdant caves of Nyssa. And indeed, august Silenus coddles his young foster son on his lap, or cradles him in his arms. He pokes him and makes him smile, or calms him by rocking him back and forth, or shakes rattles with his trembling palms. The god giggles and plucks the bristly hairs from Silenus' chest, or tugs at his pointy ears. He pats his stumpy horned head, tickles his chin, or pinches but gently his snub nose. In time, the baby boy blooms into a young man, while his blonde temples swell with a grown-up's horns. That was when the vines first produced those bringers of joy, grapes. The satyrs marvel at the fronds and fruits of Laius. Then the god speaks. You satyrs, pick the ripe fruit and trample clusters of grapes, though they're new to you. As soon as he has spoken, they pick the grapes from the vines and carry them in baskets, then eagerly crush them underfoot over hollow rocks. There on the hilltops the wine froths, the grapes burst under many a foot, and everyone's chest is spattered with purple haze. Then the satyrs, that horny band, grab and make do with whatever drinking vessels they can. Whatever chance offers, well, needs must. This one has a tankard. Another drinks from a curved horn. That one cups his hand and turns his palms into a beaker. This one, however, lies down and drinks from a pool, slurping up the wine with his lips. Yet another scoops up wine with his resonant cymbals. And another still lies on his back, gulps down the wine, but then vomits out the gushing liquor from his mouth, and the frothing liquid flows over his chest and shoulders. It's all a game, wanton songs and dances. But now the wine summons Venus, and amorous satyrs are seized by the desire to sleep with the nymphs, who are now making an exit. One satyr grabs one by her hair, another by her dress as they escape. Then Silenus avidly drains cups full of rosé wine, an old man no longer equal to the task, bloated with that sweet nectar, and still suffering from yesterday's drinking session. He's a laughing stock. But as for the god, a god born from Jupiter himself, he tramples the grapes underfoot, adorns his staff with vine wreaths, and hands a cup to a drinking lynx. Now that we've encountered each of the three songs, let us consider the commonalities and the differences between them. We've already touched upon the two most obvious commonalities. All three poems feature the song of a god or a semi-divine figure, and as such, are set within a narrative frame. There are many other thematic and structural connections between the poems. Many such features are shared by two of the passages but not another. Take the theme of cosmogony, the creation of the world. That is a feature shared by the Apollonius and Virgil passages, though whilst Nemesianus does not feature a cosmology, his Aetia, or origin story of wine, is an adjacent. Apollonius and Nemesianus both feature the infancy and childhood of a god. Zeus in Apollonius, Bacchus in Nemesianus. Two of them, Apollonius and Virgil, indirectly report the song. The other, Nemesianus, purports to quote the song directly. But the voices of the two Latin poets are somewhat more complex than that. Virgil's Song of Silenus at one point directly quotes the words of Pasiphae, nymphs, close off the wooded glade. But is Virgil at that point directly quoting Silenus? In turn, directly quoting Pasiphae? Or is Virgil sidestepping the intermediary voice of Silenus and quoting Pasiphae directly? Further, it is disputed exactly at which point the Song of Silenus ends. The last words from my translation, and the songs that Phoebus sang, and which blessed Eurytas heard, and which he taught to the laurel trees, these too Silenus sang, rides roughshod over the ambiguities of the Latin, as translations so often must. Scholars have disputed whether that particular passage is part of the reported Song of Silenus or a commentary thereon. Likewise, the narrative voice of Nemesianus is less stable than it may seem. Whilst the passage purports to be a direct rendering of Pan's song, part of it at least appears to be an interjection by Pan, a commentary directly addressed to the boys perhaps, and it is not quite clear when Pan resumes his song. I'm referring to the passage, the nymphs and ancient fauns and impudent satyrs and also me, we all look after him in the verdant cave of Nysa. Incidentally, that's certainly not the only place in Nemesianus' Eclogues where he introduces a discontinuity in narrative and voice. Eclogue 2, a particularly problematic and disturbing poem by the way, features the songs in true pastoral style of two young herdsmen, Idas and Alcon. Each has a song attributed to him, but yet Nemesianus states, in turn they present a solace for their care. Idas on the reed pipes, Alcon with his verses. First comes Idas' song, following which comes the line, "This is what Idas played on the reed pipes." Hubbard attempts to explain this away. The sense of community between the two shepherds is such that Alcon sings both songs while Idas plays the instrumental accompaniment. The first song is nominally that of Idas and the second Alcon's. The performative situation implies equivalence and interchangeability. I don't know, is Hubbard giving Nemesianus too much credit here? Perhaps Nemesianus is just a bit rubbish at handling his characters' voices. Or alternatively still, is Nemesianus a sophisticated ludic poet, playing around with our perceptions? What do you reckon? But we're now digressing into Nemesianus' other works. Let's return to the three poems of Apollonius, Virgil, and Nemesianus. We've looked at the similarities and connections between the three. To what extent, though, are these coincidences, and to what extent do they represent a conscious line, a thread of models? To me, and most proper academics who have actually considered these things seriously, it is fairly clear that Nemesianus' Song of Pan is directly modelled upon Virgil's Song of Silenus. There are far too many similarities in the narrative frame. The connection between Apollonius' Song of Orpheus and Virgil's Song of Silenus is more tenuous, but Clausen seems quite adamant of the connection. I'm not necessarily convinced. However, if there was no conscious connection between the Apollonius and the Virgil passages at the outset, then in retrospect, Nemesianus, by including further thematic connections to each of them, forges or strengthens, depending upon your view, the nexus. Thus, sitting at the end of the tradition, Nemesianus wraps all three passages up together. That's the thing with allusions and structural connections. Sometimes they don't exist until someone comes along and retrospectively makes it so. So what do you think? Which of the three passages was your favourite and which the worst? Why? We've been speaking about the three as if they existed in isolation, with Apollonius at the start of the tradition, and obviously that's not quite the case. The songs of the epic poet Demodocus in Homer's Odyssey are often cited as precedents for Apollonius' Song of Orpheus, and I've already alluded to the fact that Ovid's Metamorphoses takes the theme and structure of Virgil's Song of Silenus and takes it to a whole new level. What more recent parallel passages can you think of? Let us know in the comments. Please consider subscribing if you've not already, and we'll be back in due course.